So we take a look at Book 4 as Augustine's life progresses, and hopefully our journey together as we reflect on Augustine's experience and our own experience, our experience related to God, to ourselves, others, and to nature. Augustine, those moments when he was living at home, when his father began his journey to become a Christian, following the example of Monica, his mother. And then the opportunity arose for Augustine, tremendous sacrifice on the part of the family, to study in Carthage, which was the capital of the Roman center of North Africa. Carthage was a big place. Carthage was a large city for that time. It was a port. It was a university town. Imagine an 18-year-old in a seaport with all of the comings and goings, the available attractions and distractions, and the number of students were there no longer under the patronage of their parents, but free. A libertarian lifestyle. So in this fourth book, short, even shorter than book 3, we have Augustine, bishop now, relating what happened to him when he was young, relating his attraction to so many things that were not of God, attracted to and discovering, looking for, searching for happiness in the things of this world. So the influence of others on his life we came to see very strongly in book 3, how he would not have done what he did alone. He needed others. He was a person who lived for community for good or for community for bad. He was not an individualistic, isolated person. He related to others. He was searching for happiness, searching for truth, and so having the opportunity to study, he was testing and trying many different ways. Bottom line, though, is to realize that Augustine also knew himself to be quite privileged. Here he was, extremely privileged for somebody of his background, to be able to be living and studying in this capital city, Carthage, a meritocracy. He felt he deserved it. He was better. So the arrogance begins to flourish, and a sense of pride, and looking for happiness in anywhere he could find it. As we take the book in hand, and hopefully you will read as we go along and see if you can discover yourself. In that very beginning of the first chapter of the book, he says, "So I arrived at Carthage, where the din of scandalous love affairs raged cauldron-like around me. I hated myself for the sluggishness of my desires, in love with loving. My boundless vanity made me long to appear elegant and sophisticated." Appearances, vanity, pride. At this point, Augustine began a secret liaison with the woman who would then become the mother of his son. He was confessed to being spellbound in the second chapter of the book by theatrical shows, images that mirrored his own wretched plight. And much as we today are attracted by the latest movie, show, the latest singer, so too Augustine. He got lost in all this and did not find true happiness. In fact, chapter 4 starts by saying, "At that time I was truly miserable." Imagine having all that liberty, being able to enjoy all that privilege could provide. And what he remembers and proclaims, "I was truly miserable." He began to associate again with a crowd They were known as the wreckers. They searched for malicious amusement. These were other privileged people who felt they deserved a better life. And so they took advantage of and dominated. They were something like domestic terrorists of their time. And St Augustine was looking and searching, grabbing, trying to hold on to any way to distract and be happy, he went with them. These wreckers. In chapter 6 of the book, this book 4, a very short book, tempestuous, where Augustine is caught up with all that we think of when we think of confessions. He says, I was the ablest student in the school of rhetoric. At this I was elated and vain and swollen with pride. This and the fact that he found companionship in the wreckers, his awareness that this was not what he was called to be, not what he was searching for. Hopefully we too take a look at our lives and how different points in our lives understand that we are called to more. We are called to be for others. We are called to relate fully and entirely to ourselves, to nature, and to God. And this hunger for God began to dominate in his life, a searching for God. It was woken by having to read Cicero for his rhetoric course. And he says, this book, the Hortensius, a book which was lost to us, we only have an idea of through the quotes that Augustine places in the different works through the 50 years of his life after having read this book. He says, this book changed my way of feeling and the character of my prayers to you, O Lord. So Augustine spontaneously addressing God in his Confessions in Book 4, where he's in a cauldron of difficulty, trouble, searching. He reaches out to God. Pursuing in my 19th year, at my mother's expense, these studies, since, he says, my father had died 2 years earlier. So Monica was left alone, Augustine living far away. How ardently I longed, O my God, how ardently I longed to fly to you away from earthly things. And this is the sensation. This is what he feels. This is what he is longing. So he searched for wisdom, and he went to where others informed him he could find wisdom. Scripture, our Scripture, the Old, the New Testament. He turned to Scripture, but he said, when I studied the Bible and compared it with Cicero's dignified prose, it seemed to me unworthy. In my high and mighty arrogance, I regarded myself as grown up. So hopefully this too will be an encouragement to you and me to take a look at Scripture with humility, the simplicity with which God speaks to us, to try to help us orient our lives to others, to the common good. His disappointment in searching for truth, his disappointment in not finding what he was hoping to find in Scripture, didn't stop him from the searching. O truth, he says in chapter 10, truth, how the deepest and innermost marrow of my mind ached for you. He was searching for something. Where were you at that time, he asked of God? How far from me? I was certainly roving far away from you. And we know that God is close. God is there waiting for us to reach out. God is always available. But we occupy ourselves with so many other things that it's hard for us to discover God in our lives, in ourselves, in the community. He was wallowing in sin, cravings and domination, watching shows, sensory pleasures, he reminds himself in chapter 16, just before the ending of the book, where once again Monica, his mother, begins to take a major role. she was so faithful to God, weeping for Augustine bitterly, as mothers would weep for the corporal death of their child. She wept when she learned and heard of Augustine's debauchery. And so God consoled Monica. In chapter 19, towards the end of this book, Augustine says, a dream for Monica, by which you so comforted her that she agreed to live with me and share my table. So she was going to leave their home and go live with Augustine in Carthage under the same roof. She had initially been reluctant to do so because of his blasphemous errors. But she had the dream that she was standing on some kind of wooden ruler and saw a young man of radiant aspect coming toward her. He cheerfully laughed at her, where she was sorrowful, overwhelmed with grief, he says. He asked her the reason for her gloom and daily tears, though as usual his question was intended to teach her, not to elicit information for himself. She replied that she was mourning my ruin. He instructed and admonished her to take heed and see that where she stood, there also stood I. This was to reassure her. She took heed and saw me standing close beside her on the same road. So this is what encouraged Monica to leave her home and to go live with Augustine, who was already cohabitating with a woman and always searching for truth. And the dream foretold the joy in store for this devout woman many years later, and so gave her comfort in her anxiety. Nearly 9 years were to follow, Augustine says, when he was studying there and Monica was with him in Carthage. And her tears during that time she brought to the local bishop and asked him for consolation. And the bishop replied that Augustine, her son, was yet unteachable. He was puffed up with the novelty of his heresy. And he said, leave him alone. Simply pray for him. And when she continued in tears, the bishop said to Monica, go away now. Hold on to this. It is inconceivable that he should perish, a son of tears like yours. And so she took that as an oracle from heaven. She placed her trust in these words and continued to accompany her son. So here we have in this book 4 a summary of the most difficult period in Augustine's life, when he was most distracted and yet consoled in some way by his search for wisdom, consoled and accompanied by his mother and his mother's prayer, led through his mother and others by the Christian community, by the bishop, and by scriptures. I hope that you will allow yourself too to be encouraged by prayer and scripture, encouraged by the Christian community as you continue your journey. We continue our journey through this confession of praise, this testimony of faith, testimony of the capability of the grace of God to overcome in me and you, in us, selfishness, self-centeredness, believing we deserve all that we have, to understand that we are stewards and gifted with all that is good, and all that is given is meant to share.